where dreams shatter. Inside the GM studio, nothing else matters. Blood and chaos, the dark arts unfold. In the realm of role-playing, where legends are told.
Why, hello out there, and welcome back to the Inside the GM Studio side question episode where we field questions from the internet. I am your host, David.
I'm Matt.
And I'm going to get going with a roll of die here, and Matt's going to pick a question, and we're going to answer it here. I would say live, but it's not really live. 17.
17? All right.
17.
This one comes from Derp on r/Dungeon Masters with the title NPC Actions. I'm a fairly new DM. I was kind of just thrown in as their DM and have rolled with it. Last game, I had a baddie that was a spellcaster with all spells containing verbal components. The fighter rushed in and engaged in melee immediately. Then silence was cast in the silence was cast in area. I'm guessing they're saying that they cast silence in the area. I had the baddie stay engaged, but I am wondering if that was the correct move. If I think about it, I think in a real encounter, the spellcaster would either move and take the opportunity attack or disengage then move. Either way, should have moved. Do you run your baddies with actual forethought and strategy? I don't mean things like cast strongest spell first, but instead mean like using everything you can to strategically engage the players and force them to reconsider actions.
This question comes up a lot as to what is the most reasonable way for a particular NPC to engage the players, especially in combat, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the answer, I guess the short answer is yes. I do have that thought, but it is also predicated on the enemy's tactical understanding and their intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is there anything?
That's what I was going to say
about for you, Matt.
Well, that's what I was going to say about the spellcaster, because I've had people bring up before that a bookish, learned person wouldn't know battle strategy very well. Where I said that's dumb. A wizard would have a pretty good idea of actual tactics, but they just can't, execute them very well. At least the ones that can, that take raw strength.
Yeah, but here's the thing: is we're not talking about somebody having the commander abilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can be a tactically minded character or person without being particularly smart. And you can be smart and not tactically minded, but they both kind of probably arrive at the same results. It's like a Venn diagram, right? Where there's like an overlap in the middle where they both are relevant. So a character like a wizard or something is not likely going to know, okay, let me command my minions over here for maximum efficiency and bottleneck this up and everything like that. That's more of a tactically minded thing. But they are going to know how to maximize their own powers and how not to put themselves in a particularly vulnerable position. A spellcaster in the midst of a silence spell, when they have verbal components for every one of their spells, isn't going to stay locked into melee knowing that the biggest advantage that they have against the PCs is nullified.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to do everything and anything they can to a position where they can use their assets to their maximum capacity. And those assets might include things like positioning or, moving minions or getting to a more advantageous bit of the terrain or something like that. that's going to be more tactical. But at the very least, it's like saying if a fighter were engaged in melee and somebody knocked his sword out of his hand, he doesn't need to be particularly smart to know he better get another weapon, right?
Hmm.
Like, so, yes, but some enemies are notoriously kind of stupid. Undead in particular are
Yeah.
not very tactically minded or very smart, but they just rely on their sheer, um,
It's almost more like
they just
instinct
rely on their,
than knowledge or just, their intelligence.
yeah, and same thing for beasts or dragons, right? Like they're gonna know what their advantages are, even if they're not particularly smart, right? A
Hmm.
dragon is likely to use its breath weapon right out of the gate because it's the biggest thing that it has at its disposal. It has a whole breadth of experience that says this is how you kill shit. And so, but even monsters that aren't particularly intelligent are still going to know what the tools at their disposal. So it depends on what type of enemy you're talking about and you're dealing with. Like hobgoblins are supposedly very militaristic and very tactically minded, so it makes perfect sense that they would operate as a unit and tactically, even though they're not particularly smart. But more brute force enemies don't do that. They rely on their sheer damage output, armor class, their ferocity. But a wizard or any other intelligent character likely has to know I'm not particularly formidable in melee. I need to be able to use spells to have an advantage. If you're not doing that, then the enemies almost seem arbitrary and buffoonish, where they are not. You're going to have trouble making villains seem like they're a threat if they're not maximizing their capabilities, especially because the PCs do, right? Like, so I don't know. You got anything to add to that, Matt? Those are my initial thoughts.
So I wanted to bring up before we just go with like, these creatures are supposed to be this way. Um, I'm going to take over Dave's job right now, and I'm going to go into the narrative part. Uh, there's a trope
Mm.
for this. Uh, the tactical smart goblin, where you're fighting against a single goblin and he's giving you a hard time, and the party says, it's just a goblin. It shouldn't be this hard. What the fuck's going on? Uh-huh. Nice little mystery to solve, perhaps. It's just a cool little thing that you can throw in uh, when you do this sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, that adds intrigue to the story. But frankly, when someone any creature is fighting for its life,
Oh,
it is
sure.
going to do whatever is necessary to survive and to live, and that means that being aware of its weaknesses, right? Kobolds are a good example. They're really weak, like in direct combat, but they tend to lay traps, they tend to lure people into traps and set ambushes, and all of this is a way of leveraging its advantage. I mean, it doesn't make much sense that even the dumbest person, like, if you threw a kitten next to a bear, it's not going to just go, even though cats aren't like smart on the relative scale of like, creatures in the entire world, it's not going to go, I can probably just fight this thing in a heads up fight. It's like, no, it would never do that. Like, it doesn't need to be smart or tactically minded that something is more formidable than it and the conditions under which it is more formidable. And so, yeah, the wizard, it makes most logical sense for them to have disengaged, got to an area because silence is just a AoE, right? Like it's a static
Yeah.
area.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you
Um,
just get outside that area and use or use whatever somatic. Well, he said he has only verbal
yeah.
spells. So
Well, he
yeah,
said
that's
every
pretty
spell
rare.
that he had a verbal component to it.
Yeah, like 90 something percent of spells do have a verbal component to
Yeah.
it. It's the reason that silence is a powerful spell. So,
Hmm. P2 in the comments, I love this. This is just a good comment. A skittish goblin is going to try and run away to call his friends if he feels outnumbered and in danger. A lumbering ogre is just going to try and squish until either you die or they do. A smart wizard is going to have studied a lot and understand what a spell such as silence is and generally how to avoid it. But I love this, the other hand, a stupid thug sorcerer who knows a little magic but never studied it probably won't. I like that. That's good.
Yeah,
Because
it's
magic
getting
is
into
so
the reasonable operational assumptions.
Yeah, I like it just because with sorcerers, magic is just natural to them. It's just something that they do. They never really studied magic. So maybe they do. They see somebody cast silence and they're just, if they don't know that spell, they're just kind of like, ooh, what's happening?
But it wouldn't take them too long to figure out I need to be able to speak to cast these spells,
Oh, yeah.
and these are the best tools in my toolbox, right?
Yeah.
Like
Oh, yeah, for sure.
you don't have to be smart to know that. Like it's just having a wrangle on your capabilities, and if your capabilities are in line with a certain style of fight, then you'll lean into that, right? I mean, that's the tactics of fighting, right? And like you said, an ogre is big and strong, and like if you start, hemming it in, it probably has a strong degree of confidence that its brute force can win the day because it probably typically does. So those things within the heat of battle are usually what's interesting, is whether you can convince an enemy of a certain proposition. Does the enemy think that it can stand here toe to toe and slug it out with me? And is it right? Those are the kind of more interesting strategies that you play in a fight. But yeah, just the basic precepts of like how they would operate and being aware of what their capabilities are. It doesn't even just like a layer down, like the commenter said, even a goblin, which is pretty dumb and doesn't really have much sense of tactics, can tell when it's outnumbered, right? Like it's got a flight mechanism. It can tell when it's overwhelmed. It can see that, the PCs just killed 4 of its allies without much effort and realize that it's going to probably suffer the same fate and try to like mitigate that in some way. Doesn't take anything even beyond of animal intelligence to understand.
I've been trying to. And I will say, I'm going to actually pat myself on the back this time. I've been succeeding in when I've been doing more battle tactics with the enemies. I try to play them how they would, like David was saying, if they get down to like bloodied, critical, half hit points, whatever you want to call it. I have them start attacking with a little bit more ferocity, a little bit more flailing around, because when I believe when enemies start getting bloodied and down in hit points, they're going to start getting desperate. They know that they're about to lose. They might get desperate. So I kind of try to play that up a little bit, as well as I want to start doing a lot more of, like they were saying with the goblin. A lot of goblins, they're cowards. They'll try to run away, which I noticed that you did when we started the Phandelver and Below. The goblins in the caves, you had a lot of them just start running away. Sometimes they were going to get back up. Sometimes they were just running away because they're fucking cowards and they know if they can't win, they're going to run away. I've been trying to do that a little bit more. I was stuck in that horrible loop of just monsters want to kill you. Your enemies want you dead. So they're just going to go at you. And I know that David and I have talked about, the monsters, the enemies, I should say, I should stop saying monsters. It's adversaries, enemies. They're going to go for what they think is the biggest threat, usually, first of all, because as soon as you nullify that, let's do it. Let's get rid of that. And I know that we've said it's usually if they see you have a spellcaster, they're just like, you bad. We are going to try to kill you. And that's where your tank is supposed to come in and try to help out.
Yeah, it's unless demonstrated, like wiser PCs or wiser NPCs will be able to observe something, for instance, like although the fighter is bigger and stronger and heavily armored, he doesn't pose more of a threat than this kind of small rogue, which is like killing enemies left and right and moving around the battlefield. But And so the degree of intelligence, like for instance, you don't have to be too intelligent of an enemy to kind of assume that a heavily armored opponent is going to be more difficult to hit than a lightly armored opponent. And so that is a fairly crude tactic. And as you already alluded to, enemies don't typically like fight to the death. And so that gives the PCs an advantage where they might fall back or they might flee. So the PCs don't have to kill all of them down to the last man. But that's counterbalanced by the notion that, unlike the PCs, who are kind of scouring dungeons and exploring lost ruins and trudging into deep forests where they might have a whole day of battling and everything against them, so they need to manage their resources. Enemies that don't do that, because why would they? They're not adventurers. They're just going to hit you with their most powerful things right out of the gate because you're a big threat and they do have this self-preservation instinct. So generally the way I operate is when I have a spellcaster, he uses his highest spell slots first and works backward from there. Because there's no reason for him to keep anything in the hopper because if he does, he could be dead. And so I start there. I go, what is the biggest offensive threat like a spell that I can cast that's going to have the biggest offensive capability? Or if they have a little bit of bandwidth, maybe they might bolster their defense a little bit if they have some minions around or whatever that can protect them for a couple of rounds, and then they'll hit you with that. A dragon uses his spell casting abilities or his breath weapon first. You know, a demon is going to use their once a day powers first, especially if they're AoE powers before everybody kind of crowds in around them. They're going to try to maximize how much damage they can do in one go to save the day. But the counterbalance to that is that they're probably not going to fight all the way to the death unless it's some, you know, big demon or whatever that is just operating on base instinct. But I mean, even a wolf is going to flee if you wound it and kill the rest of its pack mates, right? Like it'll run away. And so I usually think about things in those terms about they're not as concerned with resource management unless something is, you know, they have like a once a day power or a potion, you know, a potion that heals or allows them to turn invisible. Like they're going to save that in case they do need to flee, right? It's a pretty big advantage to be able to turn invisible and then just like abscond. Like, so they keep those things in the hopper. But generally speaking, you know, if you like kill an enemy and he has like some weapon that's got like a charge, he's got this charge and a weapon that could kill everybody. It's like, why would he would have used that right out of the gate? Or he would have drank this potion that made him, you know, have 50% more hit points. He would have already done that. So, but if it's something like, you know, an invisibility potion, a expeditious retreat or something like that, those things make more sense to kind of hold in the hopper. But most enemies don't have a wide swath of spells available to them. But I think it's important to remember that, generally speaking, kind of do what makes sense for the characters, the monsters, or as you said, the adversaries, tactics and intelligence, and that is almost always going to be using the biggest and best resources available to them as soon as possible and putting themselves in a position to use the things that are the biggest advantage against the players.
Yep, I agree with that. When was it that you really started to realize that you needed to start doing more tactical stuff and to make it, I don't know if you were just like, this isn't fun, I'm going to try being tactical, that's a little bit more fun? Or did you think my encounters are not right, I'm not really playing this right, it should be this way? Did that ever go through your head?
It was probably more pushed by my players. When you have players that do think tactically and maximize what it is that they do, if you're not doing that with the adversaries, then the encounters, even though on paper they might seem difficult, they can just kind of not land the way you want them to. And so when you have a big bad that doesn't, like, if you're not maximizing from both a strategic standpoint and a resource management standpoint, then it's really tantamount to pulling punches. And you don't want to do that. Like, just put weaker enemies in if that's what you're going to do. And so if you're worried an enemy is too challenging, then, they ought not be in there. If you're not using them to their full capacity, then they're like a paper tiger, and you don't want them in there. So I realized once I started getting to a point where the players I had were a little more thoughtful about how they constructed their characters and how they managed their action economy, then that's when I started going, okay, I need to be a little more thoughtful about the way these NPCs are interacting. I don't need to make the NPCs harder. I just need to make sure that I'm using them to their full capacity. Like I said, I typically point to that scenario in the last campaign, the Blood Moon campaign or whatever, where it was like there was a dragon in there. I think it was it a young dragon or was it an adult dragon? I don't remember. It was a young dragon. It was supposed to be a pretty challenging encounter, and I just didn't use its breath weapon when I could have, because I was like, I feel like he would want to catch more than 2 enemies here, and so you guys got a little bit of and that ended up making the encounter a lot less challenging and kind of was not super dramatic as it should have been. And encounters that don't hit hard for drama's sake, especially if they're supposed to be challenging, they either leave the players disappointed or they leave the players feeling emboldened in a way that is false. Like they feel more capable than they are, and that then when you eventually do hit them with the full force of the capabilities of an enemy, it pulls the rug out from under them because they've gotten this false sense of how competent they are, neither of which are good. So
All right. Man, I don't think I have anything left on this one. That was a pretty easy one to do. Do you got anything to end on there, David?
No, I think we kind of went through it all.
I think so too. All right. We'll just leave this one on a good night.